Wonderful. Welcome, everybody. It's nice to see everyone here at our June DAG monthly meeting on Streeteries. They're back. We're doing it. It's exciting that we're back here talking about this. It feels like not that long since 2022 when we were pushing hard on this. So please introduce yourself in the chat. When we're in person, we do it in person and go around the room, but obviously we don't have that opportunity. So throw your name in the chat and then share with us your favorite streetery since that's our subject today.
Wonderful.
My name is Eli Storch. I chair the design advocacy group. As we go through today, if you have any questions, any technical difficulties, please message me or our wonderful DAG fellow, Nika Faulkner, who we're going to embarrass and say congratulations as she gets ready to get married this weekend. Congratulations, Nika. So before we dive in, I wanted to go through a few advocacy items and upcoming events that we can talk about. The first, obviously, is the abrupt and shocking closure or announced closure of UArts. There's a lot to unpack there. There's a lot to discuss, and DAG is focused on it and has will be making a comment when that is appropriate. But right now, there's so much to learn and so much to dig in and so much to find out. We're just saddened and disappointed and hopeful that city leaders and state leaders can put their heads together and work with the team to find a way to make sure that it stays a community asset, an arts-focused asset for time to come. But that's sort of all we have right now. Let's jump in. Kat, do you want to talk a little bit about RCOs?
Yeah, hi everybody, I'm Kat Kendon. I just wanted to flag for this group that RCOs have a registration window of June. So that window's up and now through the end of the month. I'm going to drop a link in the chat for some more information. There's a couple info sessions coming up. Yeah, and if that's something your community needs, it's time to register. That's it.
Thank you, and thank you, Zhenya, for being the first to introduce yourself. Don't be shy, folks. Please jump in there. Nika, do you want to talk about Preservation Awards?
Sure. Lighter note, we have the Preservation Alliance's Preservation Achievement Awards this Wednesday, so it's going to be really exciting to celebrate all of the award winners and our built environment and what we can do with it, especially the older buildings. So hope to see you there.
Thank you. A couple other items. The ongoing saga of Philadelphia's bus station and where our buses are picking people up and dropping them off. Maya Rinda from WXY had a nice piece over the weekend about the city's early efforts working with DVRPC to look at some sites around 30th Street Station and see, test viability, talk about some of the on and off ramp issues, and hopefully move towards a solution. There are other sites around the city that may or may not work, but it's good to see that there's some organized focus on one right there. Also in the news, West Philly has their first significant project permitted under the inclusionary zoning overlay. That comes, multiple years after it was introduced in December of 2021. And ultimately the layering of the transit-oriented development overlay on top of the other overlays on that site is what allowed them to remove parking and make the project work. So positive to see 41 affordable units being built in a 204 unit building, but only the first after almost 3 years. So hopefully there will be some more to come and tweaks and focus on getting that figured out. I also wanted to point out there are a couple spots where DAG's been in the news lately. Maya Rinda, again from WXYY, covered DAG's right-of-way reform event, which was a really interesting evening. And Jeff Gamage from the Inquirer was at the Welcoming District event and had some interesting thoughts on that. So we'll get those all in the chat, but if you go to their individual pages, you can find that. Marcia, would you like to give us a preview of all that's upcoming at DAG?
Yes, thank you, Eli. So on June 20th, Nate Hummel, UCD's Director of Planning and Design and DAG's newest steering committee member, will be presenting a bold vision for the proposed waterfront park along the Schuylkill River, which is just outside of the 30th Street Station. It's been the talk of the town. Renderings will feature a 2-level park, including a beach, a slide, a public pool, and an entertainment venue. Nate had remarked that West Philly is a river-based community that ironically doesn't have access to the river. So the time is right. In this presentation, Nate and the design team from Dixall, ACOM, and Biohabitats will detail the design process, and that's June 20th at 5:30 p.m. in person at 1218 Arch Street. And then on July 18th at 5:30 in the evening, Diana Lind, an urban policy specialist and writer, will join us in person at 1218 Arch Street. Diana will be she'll be discussing the heightened focus on sports and recreation and physical activity in future city planning. This topic is a natural follow-up to the Philadelphia Waterfront Park. So mark it down and we'll see you then. Thank you.
Wonderful. And there's a couple more things coming up. It's all on our website on the events tab. So go take a look at that. The last piece of advocacy item that we're working on right now is the DAG 2026 wish list, which is on our homepage. Nika, can you drop the link for that in the chat? We had said it was closed as of May 31st. We'll give everyone here today to submit an idea that we're going to share with Michael Numis, the city's 2026 director, who has been reading them and has had them shared with him and is very excited. So if you have something great, something big, something small, send it to us through that link. And it's a really fun way to get involved. We're going to post them all and allow people to vote on them, talk about them, get involved with them, and hopefully we can build some cool stuff for 2026. So with that, let's dive in. We got a great program. We've got great speakers. We got a great moderator, Nate Hummel, putting him to work. He joined our steering committee and we're just making the most of his time. So Nate, as Marcia mentioned, is the Director of Design and Planning for the University City District, has been Mr. Parklet for a long time with his work around bringing that public space back to people and working on early streeteries. He was on the DAG Streeteries working group back in 2022. And so we dragged him along into our fold. So Nate, please take it away with introductions and get us started here.
Fantastic. Thanks, Eli. So hi, all. For those I don't know, Nate Hummel. Yeah, but it started in 2011 when we sort of introduced parklets, the portmanteau I've had to say for half of my career now, to West Philadelphia. And then we had an experiment and it rolled up into policy for the entire city about a year or so after our first experiments. And so we learned a lot of things over the years of what it was. When we first did it, we had no idea it would work. They were only in San Francisco back in 2011. And there wasn't a whole lot of precedent on what would happen, what would work, how long should they be, what we were so confused on what would work and what wouldn't work. We ended up settling on a modular idea that it could be 20 feet, 10 feet, 50 feet, whatever, and then having movable furniture, which ended up as something we like as urbanists. We like to have movable furniture, but it ended up being a solution to the community groups who were worried that they become nuisance overnight. And we said, well, if you have movable furniture, you can bring that inside. Then it's no different than a sidewalk. And that helped folks get together there and approve it. So when we had those controversies, that was kind of there. One of the key things I think we found back in that we did a study of who's using them and what's happening. We found that parklets placed in a successful location, so where there's reasonable transparency between the restaurant and the location, increased sales by 20%. And we found that across the board to these communities. So when we did that, then we had previously been funding our parklets through philanthropy. Then it became the businesses came to us and said, wow, we want one of these things. We want that 20% increase in sales. And so that was going along and kind of was getting a little stale, to be perfectly honest. And then March 13, 2020 rolled around and every restaurant closed. And I was on a couple of calls with some top city officials and they're like, what could we do? And I said, you could ease the restrictions on parklets and make it easier, because we had to get 51% approval of residents on the block to dare take away one parking space and give it over to a restaurant. That kind of took off from there. The Streeteries, I think we know that they were very successful for a while during the pandemic. The 800 of them that were out there. We had a lot in University City where I work. But then the rules kind of came in and they got a little bit more restricted and a little bit tougher. And you maybe don't see as many of them as you once did. Certainly don't see as many as you once did. And so that was a little frustrating. DAG stepped in and helped come up with some ideas of ways we can do this. We're working with city departments, and it was just sort of a slog. And then, amazingly, Councilmember Rue Landau said, wait a minute, why are there no streeteries? Why isn't this an economic development tool? Why aren't we doing something about this? And raised the call and got people going again. And I think has helped ease a lot of the burdens on that. And so, though we've come from the little seating platforms that we didn't even know how long they should be and where they should go, I think it's now a consensus that these benefit both the businesses and the communities. One of the highlights, I hate to say that necessarily because the pandemic was overall awful, but one of the pluses was that the vibrancy that the Streeteries provided the city. And then you walked around, you saw that vibrancy. And so in addition to the economic development, it's that quality of life stuff. And so we're in the process here of refining it, making it easier, trying to get more restaurants to use this tool for economic development, try and get more people to use this tool for quality of life. And so we have some really exciting speakers here to talk about their experiences. And so we, of course, have Councilmember Rue Landau, who's going to talk about the legislation that she's enacted and the committee work that she's done to make that happen. And we have, excuse me, Jacob and David from WXY Studio in New York. Though not Philadelphia based, New York has parklets and streeteries too. And they went through the ringer to get some approvals for their work. And they're going to present kind of what they were able to produce for the city of New York. I think there's a lot of parallels here, and certainly we'll be able to do some takeaways. When they are done speaking at about 11 o'clock, Councilmember Landau has a hard stop. And so we're going to try, if you have any questions, we'll ask those of her first, and then we'll have Jacob and David for a few minutes after that. And so we can ask some of their more design questions after that. So with that, I will turn it over to Councilmember Rue Landau.
Thank you so much for having me. This is really a treat. And I loved hearing, first of all, the history of Streeteries from parklets from your perspective, and can't wait to keep staying connected for all of your design ideas. I'll start with an apology that I'm in City Hall with this ugly wood paneling for you very creative types. This is not usually where my computer sits, so I'm going to do better, but maybe we'll start doing some fun backgrounds too, so nobody knows that I'm sitting up against what looks like a 1970s basement. But I want to, this has been, I've only been in office for 5 months, and I've been trying to hit the ground running on some things that I think are essential and very important for the city of Philadelphia, and some changes that need to make pretty quickly. And one of those was really looking at outdoor dining and seeing what happened, right? I was a part of the enthusiasm with you. I enjoyed the dining. I know anybody who was in walking distance of a place really enjoyed being outside. One, for health reasons. Two, because it's fun. There's camaraderie. It keeps up the vibrancy on the street and the sidewalk. It's actually safer, as far as I'm concerned, of having people outside. And I noticed it as much as everybody else did, was missing it. I also happen to have a brother and sister-in-law who are in the restaurant business, and were kind of telling me the ups and the downs and the tricky parts and the good parts all along the way. So I have a unique perspective also of someone who just got into council, is that I worked for the administration, the mayor's administration, for multiple years under Mayor Nutter and Mayor Kenny. It's very helpful not only to know what it's like on the inside and having to administer any of the rules you might make from council, but also to have some relationships and some friends in here where we can easily have conversations. And Karen Fagley is one of them, who's here on this panel today. In this Zoom today. Somebody who is, also a fan of outdoor dining, but also somebody really easy to talk to, and has to administer the other parts of it, the tricky parts on the inside. How do we make this happen? How do we do it in a way that's legal or safe or whatever? So it makes conversations really good and easy that way. And the administration has been very, very supportive in all of this. We know this is great for the economy. It's great for the restaurants, for the workers. It's great for those of us who want to go eat outside. And we recognize very much that during the pandemic, people put up anything anywhere, and could really create your own streetery or your own sidewalk cafe. And that in this case, there's got to be some sort of structure around that. And what does that look like? So we started not only looking at what the original law was, and tell me also, Nate, if this is where you want me to go with this, I can keep, great, I'll tell you the process we went through. Really looking at the law, the way it happened before, which was like, hey, open up, do whatever, to then all of the restrictions that came right around 2021, and did the math as to how that kind of killed the outdoor dining scene, and started to work with PRLA, the Pennsylvania Restaurant Lodging Association, lots of individual restaurants, chefs who were coming and talking to us, and just folks on the ground who really want to make this happen as well. And we started to figure out, like, what are there's a lot of pieces to change here. Council is not always as fair. The city is not always as fast as we want it to be. So what can we change now? And what can we do right now for the first piece to make this easier and better? For us, what we learned was the very first piece that had to change was the adjacency piece. You had, in Philadelphia, we got a lot of skinny little restaurants, and we had changed the rules so that you could abut the neighboring property. But if you had permission from your neighbor, you could extend your streetery another space over and have the adjacency open up. And that too was the most important piece for the restaurants, that if they're going to put the time and the money into this, that we had to make sure that they could do it adjacent to the property. So that was my first piece of streetery legislation that I put in. Again, lots of conversations with the administration. This will make it so that people, again, they want to do the investment, it'll be worth it so long as they have their permission from their neighbors. We got really close to putting in more expansive legislation about sidewalk cafes. It did not happen just yet. It will happen in the fall, and we're going to create the groundwork of it this summer. But basically, in Philadelphia, the weird thing is you have to, if you want to have a sidewalk cafe, you need to go to your city council person along with a whole lot of other things in order to introduce an ordinance to approve your sidewalk cafe. And some district council people now are saying we could do this by right. We could just allow this to happen under, maybe a certain amount of tables, a certain amount of chairs. If it's going to be 20 tables and chairs, we'd still go through the ordinance piece. But we've got much more backing on this than we did before. The other thing is that while talking with the administration, they are much happier with sidewalk cafes than they are with streeteries. Streeteries are taking up the parking spots, or sitting on a manhole, or sitting on an electrical line. They'd rather us have more sidewalk cafes. And so let's make that easier too. It's easier on a lot of levels if you've got the space to do it. So we want to definitely make sure that happens. But the last thing to say, and I'll keep shouting out the great Karen Fagley and the Commerce Department, is that they did something that was super helpful for the restaurant owners in Philadelphia. One of the things we heard over and over again was how cumbersome the process was. There's too many steps, there's too many people to talk to, and there's too many agencies involved. And so you have to go to Commerce first. They tell you what you can and can't do. You then go to Streets. Streets tells you got to do this. Streets says no a lot, because Streets' job is to protect streets. Commerce's job is to support commerce in the city of Philadelphia. And then there's often L&I pieces. And of course, as you know, we've been opening a restaurant. There's like health and L&I and whatnot. Commerce has agreed that they will have business navigators available for restaurants, so that you go to Commerce and that they are helping you to navigate the entire process. So that if there's conversations that have to happen with Streets, they can help you get there, or help you have those conversations, or nudge it along to make sure that you're getting the answer that you need. So this is, honestly, as excited as the outdoor dining scene is about the opening up of the adjacency and what we're going to do with sidewalk cafes, having Commerce be the number one point of contact is the thing that has actually made them the happiest. They want to be able to do this. They want it streamlined, and to know that there's somebody who's cheering them on and who's on their side is the most important thing. And they want to help make it happen as much as possible. So we're going to keep working with them. I want to shout out all of the advocates also who helped us move this along. There's urbanists, there's bicyclists, and a whole other group that I don't think we talk about enough, which is really the disabled community, who oftentimes can roll up to a table outside much easier than they can get inside any of our old buildings. And whether it's just in a wheelchair, or just even having trouble navigating a couple of steps, or not even wanting to be inside a stuffy, loud restaurant, there's people all over the city who are extremely excited about this. When my dad was alive, I rolled him up as often as possible. He loved being outside, loved outdoor dining. And to be honest with you, with the condition that he had, he knew it too. I love him. He made a mess when he ate. And it is much easier to make a mess, and he felt less self-conscious about it than when you're outside and you know that it'll be easier cleanup. So this is a win-win-win as far as I see it. People are really happy about it. We're already seeing places pop up, and we will continue to have the relationship with the administration that we need in order to keep making this as easy as possible.
Oh, you nailed your time. What a pro.
Oh, thanks. Look at that.
The business navigator thing is just humongous. So that is having someone to hold your hand through all of those difficult things. It makes it so much more equitable to so many more folks that would have just like, I don't know those folks. So that is indeed a humongous deal.
Yeah.
So I think what we want to now do is transfer over to David and Jacob to talk about their ideas and how they got things approved. If anybody on this Zoom has ever worked in New York, imagine working in Philadelphia, but then there's borough presidents that can just like completely ruin your idea when you got it all that approved. So they have even more regulatory stuff. So if they've got this through, I often look to them as like, whoa, if they got it approved in New York, let's get a close look at that. So David and Jacob, take it away from WXY Studio.
Great. Thank you so much, Nate. And thanks for your remarks, Councilmember Landau. It's really, really exciting to see that Philadelphia is innovating in this space. And, I think it never hurts to have a neighbor that's continuing to kind of push the envelope on outdoor dining. And, New York is a as Nate said, a challenging regulatory environment, and we've been able to do a lot with this program. That there are some things that you mentioned that we weren't able to do. So, Jacob will walk us through some of the details there. But I want to just kind of quickly set the stage for some of this work, and kind of why it's more broadly important, and kind of the thinking around how we think about curbs and streets, and cities in particular in the kind of post-COVID area. And like Philadelphia, when COVID hit, New York City adopted a very ambitious, really pretty permissible outdoor dining program that very quickly expanded. And our work for the city's Economic Development Corporation, the Department of Transportation, and a variety of other stakeholders has really been about trying to take what had been a very kind of nimble, but a little bit chaotic temporary program and make that something that could have legs as a permanent program with a process, with clear stakeholder review checkpoints, that's really designed to expand and thrive over time. So if you go to the next slide. One of the things that I always kind of come back to in sort of framing the why of outdoor dining is that this isn't really just about dining. It's also part of a much larger conversation around how we as cities really rethink kind of the biggest piece of our public realm that's the least expeditiously utilized. And one of my favorite facts is that, in pre-mid-1950s, overnight street parking in New York City was actually illegal. And so streets were really places that people used for play, for commerce, that had economic activity that went well beyond parking. And COVID, and even before COVID, we were seeing a paradigm shift in how we were thinking about street uses and curbside uses in New York City and across the country. When COVID hit and the city launched the program in 2020, restaurants responded immediately, basically growing the program to its current size of about 13,000 participating restaurants. But that's really part of a larger curbside management paradigm shift that included thinking differently about access for sanitation and consolidated waste around more traditional parklets and public spaces, around pedestrian safety. And like Philadelphia, we've really seen the city DOT and advocates throughout the city kind of embrace a more holistic understanding of how streets and curbs in particular can kind of serve their adjacent uses. To the next slide. But when the program launched in 2020 and really expanded quickly in 2021, what we found and what the city found was that kind of turning over a piece of the curb to private use also created some real challenges. From an accessibility perspective, we found that a lot of restaurants were creating conditions that made areas impassable for pedestrians and created a lot of issues for those with mobility impairments or issues around accessibility for the blind. And we also found that, as the program expanded, certain bad actors were really starting to kind of eat into the kind of commitment that New York City had to a really robust and open public realm. And so our work, if you go to the next slide, really centered on starting to think about how to begin to introduce a set of design guidelines that could manage that those sort of negative externalities and challenges while also sort of safeguarding the public interest and expanding the program. What's interesting is that when the city introduced the temporary program and the original design guidelines for that are on the right, they were actually building on a much earlier generation of a parklet or street seats program that had been introduced in 2010. And so there had already been a kind of pre-existing process and even some design guidelines for that process that existed previously. That process, however, was one that had a significant amount of review, including review by community boards, a seriously complex and kind of labyrinthine design review process. And when the city introduced the temporary guidelines, they essentially made it an as-of-right program, similar to Philadelphia and other places, which effectively allowed for them to have a kind of checklist that restaurants went through, and then they would build to those specifications with more of an emphasis on enforcement. The balance between these two things was really where our work came in, trying to think about how do we take the best from the old program, as well as the lessons learned that really didn't result in that program thriving and expanding. How do we kind of control for the worst that happened during COVID and during the sort of proliferation of the temporary program? Go to the next slide. At the outset of our process, which really started last summer, we went around around the entire city to sort of document existing conditions, innovations, things that, really trying to get a sense of what people were doing on the ground, how they were constructing these outdoor dining kiosks, where there might be lessons learned from a structural perspective, but then also challenges from a pedestrian circulation and safety perspective. And we went, to every borough, looking at documenting every typology from Staten Island to the Bronx, from narrow streets to wide streets to steep streets to streets in the floodplain, looking at the myriad issues that each of these different setups would have to confront across a pretty diverse environment. Go to the next slide. We also worked with a fabricator, a group called Situ that during COVID had developed something called NYC Turnout to develop a sort of a kit of parts that could readily be transformed into a kind of modular outdoor dining menu of sorts. And we worked with Situ to basically create 4 working prototypes in their shop. One of the things that was really interesting that they had done and sort of brought to the project previously was this notion of multifunctionality. So really thinking about how can you take a piece of street furniture or an outdoor dining kiosk and begin to think about that as a public space? How can you think about the challenges of storage? How can you create something that works from a security and a kind of cleanliness perspective? And the city really challenged us to sort of look at all of these parameters in tandem and think about how to create the most robust and sort of flexible longer term outdoor dining program that could, weather all of the different challenges. The timeline for this really followed an announcement in summer 2023 where the mayor signed the permanent outdoor dining bill. Then we basically kicked off along with DOT to begin working through their design guidelines, testing them against the set of prototypes that we were developing. In the meantime, providing kind of running commentary and support for the longer term guidelines. And then set up a kind of application portal and an online menu where people could take the prototypes that Jacob will go through in a little bit more detail in a second, and really have that as a resource that they could download and use for their own outdoor dining setups in the right of way. And the permanent program launched this past spring and is going to be going fully into effect in the fall. You go to the next slide. As part of this, we looked at a range of different issues. Some of them I mentioned, but it went from conversations with the sanitation department and thinking about integrating waste to issues of pedestrian and traffic safety, design and quality control to ensure that every single one of these setups supports the built environment, and thinking about all of the different potential utility and infrastructure conflicts that happen in the right of way. We also were particularly interested in how to sort of support clean setups and control the rodent population in New York City. New York City recently got their first rat czar. So we worked closely with them to really think about strategies to kind of make sure that as outdoor dining setups thrive and expand, that we don't end up with a situation where they're negatively impacting New Yorkers' quality of life. Go to the next slide. You know, in terms of our, you know, overall goal, you know, we really set out to support the city in creating a really comprehensive set of resources that could be online, open source, and available for restaurants, in particular restaurants that don't have the don't have the money or the funding to hire a design firm to design something, you know, specific to their site, and really trying to kind of democratize that process and make it as accessible to everybody that wants to participate across the New York City landscape. The next slide. I will just note as a kind of detail, we were particularly focused on roadway cafe setups. The program also covers sideway cafe setups, and you know, the council member mentioned that as something that's sort of being looked at in tandem in Philadelphia. Very much these two were linked. New York City also had a long-standing sidewalk cafe program that had some existing established rules. So our work focused on roadway cafes, but certainly can share additional resources on sidewalk cafes as needed. Go to the next slide. And then the only other thing I'll mention is that one of the things that really changed and presented a design challenge within the overall program that we designed is that New York City went from having a year-round program that really resulted in a significant amount of wear and tear on the outdoor dining setups to something that actually has to be modular and requires disassembly at the end of the season, at the end of November. And so our big challenge, along with our fabricator situ, was to think through strategies to create modular setups that could be put up and taken down within 24 hours. And we actually had to do a test as part of that. You know, to really ensure that we're not ending up with a kind of blighted environment on the curbside, and that these units really have staying power in the streetscape long term. So, and then like Philadelphia, the accessibility community was a significant and major stakeholder. And obviously, as some of the photos that I showed previously kind of support, you know, we're seeing real quality of life impacts from the temporary program. The permanent program was designed really to meet and exceed universal accessibility guidelines, which was particularly challenging on steep streets, some streets that weren't accessible to begin with. And so Jacob will talk a little bit more about how we kind of dealt with some of those challenges. For anyone that's interested, there's an existing marketplace that we set up, not only with all of the prototypes and the design drawings that you can download, but also to create a real living library of systems and sort of components that people can build and expand over time. So we were able to kind of bring in a range of different fabricators that we're working with to test and expand this sort of library or kit of parts, as well as to solicit designers, fabricators, construction workers, and products that are on the dining out marketplace to support the 13,000 restaurants and growing that want to take part in the program. So now I'll turn it over to Jacob Dugopolski from our team.
Thanks, Dan. So this is part of a 2.5 to 3 hour training presentation that we did to different service providers. So I'm going to do a very shortened version of it, but tell a few stories about the 4 setups that we helped to prototype as part of this process. So after we did that initial work, this was an RFP that we responded to and were selected for. We built with situ, designed and built with situ 4 setups that are out there in the streets and testing and refining what is possible. We tested the roadway cafe requirements that the DOT helped to create here, to see, to road test, see what's possible, what are issues, to refine the details of those guidelines. Really just to make clear, the only things that are required are the barriers and tables and chairs to make that space accessible, safe, accessible, and clean. But it's really just the seating and barriers that are needed. Everything else is optional. So cladding, flooring, plantings, etc., any overhead coverings. One of the big shifts in the program from the temporary is opening these up. Partially, it's the dining season that this is changed to, but also for visibility of crossings and otherwise. It's really, screening is allowed along the street side, but not along the short sides of the setup. So I'll talk more detail about that. So this was our team that we put together, and you can see the multi-agency client that we were working with, the City of New York, our WXY team, City on Fabrication, with a lighting designer, engagement consultant, and Silman for on the structural engineering side. And the components that we worked with a range and tried to find a range of what's possible are the barriers, the floorings, the overhead coverings, screening, the lighting, electrical components, and then we're giving the kind of resources of seating and other materials that could be used within it. One of the biggest parts that I'm going to spend a minute on is siting. This is probably one of the most complex pieces, and there's a lot of detail in the New York City rules about siting and refinements from the temporary program. It was a lot encroaching on the sidewalk, as David mentioned, street markings and buffers, which is along bike lanes, and being able to see those lines as an important piece. They were right up and against one each other between adjacent restaurants, which had some issues with emergency access or trash collection. And one of the biggest pieces, this is in terms of drainage, blocking that flow along the curb to kind of wash out the streets and keep that clean in everyday situation. So here are a few diagrams that DOT created and are on the Dining Out website that show the allowable dimensions to help restaurants understand what's possible. So there's a 40-foot maximum for the setups, 8-foot depth, and there needs to be 3 foot between cafes. So basically a 1'6" buffer along each side of the cafe. Now that could be reduced in certain situations if there's a residential entry or something that's neighboring frontage that's not used for restaurants. You could extend up to that line, but if there's a neighboring restaurant, you need to provide that 3 foot between. I appreciate the council member noting the adjacent property piece. I think that will help expand what's possible. If there's an agreement between multiple restaurants, the legislation in New York right now is really just to the specific restaurant frontage itself. There are some unique conditions that they help try to solve that were kind of further unclear in the temporary program. In this, where there's a bike lane along the sidewalk edge, there's a floating parking lane. That buffer to the bike lane needs to be visible, but we can abut that line and use that parking lane still. And then there's some angled parking lane or particular parking lanes that and how it could preserve those sight lines. There's many further diagrams. I won't spend just so we can get to the prototypes. Won't dwell on all of these. Longer frontages needs to be 6 foot between. There's a lot of clearances around elevated conditions, crosswalks, markings, a kind of range of 5 or 10 foot or 15 foot clearances, which really set up a zone in which you can build this setup. One of the biggest things is the crosswalk itself. I think in looking at crash data for the temporary program, It's the visibility of the crosswalks between cars and pedestrians traveling across. That's really key. So that 20-foot zone on the stopping side is key, and 8-foot on the opposite when it's the non-approaching side. In terms of fire hydrants, you have the 15-foot clearance. You know, there's pavement markings that you need to, you know, have 6-foot clearance from, and a lot of, you know, smaller pieces that, you know, 5-foot from other stations and otherwise. The utilities do need to have this clearance as well, and they change per type. Transformers, 3 feet, and 1-foot sticks around manholes. So this does offer, you know, some flexibility to have them within the setup, but you cannot have flooring over top of some infrastructure like that. One of the biggest creative ways the temporary program adapted was often going around or building around trees to protect those resources. You can't encroach or attach on the trees. We even saw a lot of electrical lines connected to trees and issues with that. It's certainly protecting that and having some buffer space around the trees is the key piece of it. I'll go through the prototypes, and then I'm happy to answer some more of the questions here about utilities and otherwise. Through what we tested was a range of street types and a range of typologies for starting with a barrier, what's possible. So we had a corner, mid-block, floating parking lane, and a steep street as the four types to test. And what was really exciting about this was getting these out there, getting the feedback from the restaurants, from the customers, from how it holds up to the weather, and starting to refine what those not only the requirements, but the recommendations are, and making that open source, like David mentioned. This was the first that we installed back in September, October of last year, Sunday to Sunday in the Lower East Side, which used, basically, it was a corner setup and had clearance from the crosswalk. The owners wanted this to be as open as possible, to particularly in the Lower East Side streetscape. And they didn't have an interest in heating or cooling, but we pursued a battery-powered solution to work the lighting in this case. It was a fairly simple barrier type. We used aluminum frames that actually just hold water in trash cans. So very kind of stackable, easy off-the-shelf system for the water. One of the main shifts in the New York program is from sand as a weight to water, which is easier to drain and fill up on a regular basis, and especially with this yearly cycle. We used an aluminum structure. This could also be a wood-framed barrier for the containers, wood posts, and this was a tension fabric roof here, hanging lighting, rechargeable table lights, and had a storage bench in there as well. This was all fabricated in situ shop in the Brooklyn Navy Yard, so we could really test out how quickly and how it could be assembled easily. We used standard flooring panels as well in these kind of 2-foot increments, basically a roof deck tile that could be used to kind of have that movable aspect. A few renderings of this and the actual thing. This has been out there, as I mentioned, since September. Probably a quickened kind of wear and tear of the setup being in the Lower East Side. And we've seen a lot of graffiti otherwise. The bid helps take care of kind of repainting the panels, resealing the panels as needed. There's a few adjacent setups. There's drainage that had to be figured out, but these are easily liftable panels to help clean out the gutter and then lift the panels within the setup. And I think a few big lessons learned in this, just discovering how irregular curbs are in the city. You think it's a standard 4 to 6 inches, but it's often only a couple inches, and it varies quite a bit. So having to accommodate those varying slopes and make it fully accessible. Also, how high the crown of the street is, kind of how to keep a level setup. So the flooring is actually a pretty critical element that a lot of restaurants want to make a level dining surface because of the crown of the street being so severe in some places. We certainly had to tune the how much what the slope of the roof is. We lowered it to kind of have a better water runoff in this situation. But the restaurant owners also liked unclipping this and enjoying the kind of shoulder seasons to get enough sun on a shady street. So it's a kind of adaptable, easy to change roofing and lighting system. The second was kind of a variation on this, but a little bit smaller setup where we tested something in Jackson Heights, Morike, which was a nested barrier solution. Basically, 2 parts of a barrier fitting together to kind of lessen the storage volume of this. Just wanted a bit more screening and roofing here. We tested a more permanent solution, but again, because of the no winter dining, no heating need, but we did put a fan as part of this system to help circulate the air, and this is hardwired back to the restaurant itself. Similar water weight within the barriers, and views of it, and then fabrication of this. Kind of seeing a similar system and developing that, but a modular roof system, 2-foot panel, so that could be easily replaced yearly, and a final view of what this looks like on the street. So a little bit easier to disassemble. We kind of found a few more things that worked here, but this is on a very busy street and it did get quite banged up with different parking on both sides. We did upgrade the marine plywood on this from the first setup, so it's getting used to the materials that can have wear and tear with the outdoor environment. And the third was a full 40-foot setup, and we used standard barriers, off-the-shelf water barriers for this, and clad them in a more vestibule roof type. So it's a much longer setup. We have the complication of how to work with the bike lane. It's actually quite close to the corner, so it's easy to roll there from the curb cut, but also as a temporary ramp to get over the bike lane. A view of the system. This has a few more components, planting the vestibule roof, and a solar panel that's integrated on one end that helps power the lighting, and a battery pack within the setup and power the lighting within, so it's not connected back to the restaurant. The fabrication of that, we had to order these barriers because the dimensions are always different than actually what's listed in the products. So dimensioning, custom cutting around this to have a cladding. These needed leveling shoes to kind of these aluminum frames to help level the setup. So it was pretty, and they help tie together 2 of the standard barriers. So it's a pretty intensive flooring system, but went together very quickly on site to level each of those pieces and get a overall solution here. Because of the manhole, we did ramp down within the setup to grade. Quite see it here. So it has an accessible entry within there and up to the dining surface. Solar panels, and before the planting was added here. It's just to see this all in context. I'm gonna fly through the last one so we can talk about these and have enough time for questions. This was an interesting one on a steep street. 5% slope. So we were working with entry on one end of it and a dining surface that was level and a step on the other end of it. We use more of a kind of a telestrut system for the flooring, basically a stage system, and could be leveled and as a more off-the-shelf system. The unique piece with this is it's overall integrated. So we were able to work with the structural engineer and prove that this is as effective as water weight as a kind of overall system. These kind of these barriers, this integrated barrier system, and have this removable ramp, leave the sidewalk fully accessible, but as a removable ramp that could be placed inside the setup when it's not being used. But just a kind of a nice flexible RPL cladded setup that really is performing well also. So all of this is actually was posted, our drawings, the lessons learned, posted to the Dining Out website, and we're listing all of the products in the marketplace directory. The firms that can have gone through training are up there as well. The kind of range of products are still being added there, but it's a really interesting system to really give the restaurants all the resources possible to go through this program. One thing just to mention, this is really part of this transition period to get all of these, to launch this portal, to give all these pieces. And the deadline for submissions for the permanent program is in August. So we'll see a real transition this fall when all the temporary setups need to be taken down and the permanent program begins in 2025. So can certainly share all the links, but the Dining Out website is a fantastic resource that shares a lot of these pieces. So I will stop there. My quick run through the setups, and happy to turn it over to questions.
Thank you, David and Jacob. Pretend like there's a huge round of applause in the full room. I think since we have the council member for about 15 more minutes, and she asked a wonderful question in the chat, maybe if you had questions directly, Councilmember Landau, for Jacob and David, why don't you fire away?
Thank you. I do. That was incredible. It's so good to know when you're in it that other people either went through the struggle first and figured some things out, or are in it with you. I was just in Montreal and saw some incredible outdoor spaces. Where did you look for your inspiration or information when you were working on your scene?
So when we started, I think I would say that there are sort of three places. In terms of guidelines and parklet setups, San Francisco and San Diego had done a lot of work to really think about kind of creating those guidelines. And San Francisco in particular has, like Philadelphia, had a really robust parklet program for a long time that just, has a lot of design thinking and creativity that's been kind of baked into it. And also had started to set up the bones of a temporary program beforehand. We definitely looked at Montreal and in a range of different European cities. I mean, Oslo and Barcelona and other places, there's a lot of innovation in thinking about parklets and streeteries as public spaces. But we also found just a significant amount of innovation in and around New York City. I mean, with 13,000 setups between sidewalk and roadway setups in the city, we were able to really discover creative ways that people were solving some of the spatial challenges in their streets and thinking about barriers differently, and even creating kind of smaller business models, like a couple of groups, Reply, Fantastica. I mean, they're all in the kind of library, had kind of been first movers in this space, including, Situ, who we worked with. So there was already some blueprints for us to build on in shaping some of these best practices. Jacob, I don't know if you wanted to add a little to that.
Okay. Well, here's another question. Did you distinguish between places that sold alcohol and not food versus restaurants and/or cafes?
I know the DOT commissioner is really having that all food establishments, even, some businesses that have a food license should be able to participate in this program. So even if it's a bodega that has, a license to serve sandwiches, they should be able to participate in this program. In terms of licenses, I think there's some different insurance requirements that probably between the different restaurant types, but all food establishments are encouraged to participate in the program.
The majority of the program,
Mhm.
about 8,000 of the 13,000 serve alcohol.
How many of the 13? I didn't hear.
It's about 8,500 of the 13,000 serve alcohol.
And then do you have different time restrictions when the outdoors can be open versus the indoors?
I didn't know that right off. I didn't get the time.
I believe that the setups all have to close by 11, but I will we'll double check the rules on that.
Helpful. These are just some of the questions that we're having here in Philly. Yeah, and even some of our like little beer places, Beer Love, for example, wants to have outdoor dining, but they don't sell food. Maybe you need to get some bags of chips or something.
Yes, exactly.
Hot dog rollers.
Dollar dogs are a big thing in Philly.
Councilmember, you also had a question about the barriers?
Yeah. The Commerce Department, Streets is very fond of these big orange barriers that look similar to about 4 slides ago, you had blue ones.
Yep.
And you made them look nice. So I was very
Yes.
excited to see that, but the Streets is very fond of, we have the same ones, they're orange. And, people want to, people have invested money in the past before they had to take them down on these beautiful planters and they're strong structures. Some of them said like, would stop a truck, but still, the city would like you to use these orange barriers.
So the barriers are a kind of standard, I think that because they're the product that has been tested the most for crash conditions, the Yodoc barriers or barriers. They are about 150 pounds per lineal foot, and just the water weight within it. And that was used as a standard in the rules to achieve that weight requirement. But you could do that through other means, like a frame. That's why we tested a frame, basically just trash cans full of water, or you could use the barriers, and they come in many different colors other than orange, which is exciting. But and clad them, and we've seen some innovative ways of doing that. We're also looking into ways of doing a custom rotomolded. Basically, you can, this is a product that's produced for construction sites. Why not make it something specific for restaurants? That's a plastic piece that could be filled with water, but designed for that purpose. Really, and I think David mentioned this too, New York City is shifting away from the soil and sand because of the rodent issues. And there's a lot of issues of those spilling out and otherwise. Water is preferred. There are some provisions within the rules that restaurants or companies can submit alternatives as long as they perform to that same level. So some people are testing steel, concrete, heavier things, a little bit harder to move on a quick basis, but it's achieving the weight and the safety of it.
Philly doesn't have a rat czar that we need to get approval from. So look at that.
I won't get into rats in water, by the way. I did housing work for many, many years. So I wanted to talk about the financial barriers for, low to moderate income restaurant owners. This is all beautiful. You got architects, you've got planning. How are we going to make this accessible and equitable for everybody to be able to do it?
Great question. And that's, we prototype this at a higher cost, obviously to figure out the research and development as part of the process, but by kind of finding these best practices and posting these, you don't have to come with an architect to submit these. It's basically just a site plan and a plan that complies with the program. Doesn't so there's a wide range of who can fabricate or build those. I think there are, aluminum is more durable, but obviously more costly. So certainly could do a lot of these solutions in wood. And, I think a lot of these companies that are coming up and on the marketplace are trying to provide these as whole systems, including renting or leasing, that could come at a lower price point. And, I think we're just discussing that ongoing to how to bring it to a lot of the small businesses around the city that can come at a better price point. There's quite a range of what people have spent in the temporary program, but to achieve anywhere close to that number in the permanent program, that more cost effective.
Is the renting or leasing a theoretical thing, or are there actually people doing that?
There are a few companies that are proposing doing that, and a few of those are up on the marketplace. Okay. I think everybody's still getting their footing here as we're transitioning to the permanent program. But it's especially with the the seasonality and the storage. That's a big piece of why those are starting to take shape.
That's a really interesting factor if it's affordable, or even if somebody wants to try it for a year to see if it's successful for them. You don't know.
Ours are allowed 12 months. You guys only get 6 months, right?
Or 8 months. 8 months.
Or 8, yeah. And that really gets into equity. Like who's can afford a warehouse, right? So that's a really good innovation.
We did find in the stakeholder interviews with restaurants that a lot of restaurants had rented storage spaces in New York City already, in part just because there's a big storage market, and there isn't you have a lot of hole in the wall restaurants that are swapping out furniture. So that was kind of surprising. We thought that the storage issue might be a more acute one, but found that folks had other storage needs that they were confronting. The other thing I'll just note is the similarity in terms of business model to scaffolding is definitely one that we were looking at. So scaffolding companies, including more innovative scaffolding companies like Urban Umbrella, have kind of somewhat similar business model, albeit those are self-certified installations, whereas the open restaurants won't be.
Great. Can I just ask Jacob, while we still have the council member, that 150 pounds per linear foot measure, did that come from a traffic engineer? Like how official is that? Is that something we could maybe borrow for Philadelphia?
Yeah, no, that's one that was debated through the process. That came from DOT's engineers and their review. It's basically comparable to what's been tested in the water barriers, the Yodoc barriers, the orange ones that you see. That's about 150 pounds per linear foot, and just has been tested to stop an impact at that point. So because these cannot be connected to the roadbed in any way, which could help in that, they need to be temporary. They need nothing could be into the asphalt, into the concrete. It's really the weight that you're relying on, and to start.
Could you put in the chat a link to the actual writing of that? I said, when New York City approves something, that goes a long way in Philadelphia.
Absolutely. I'll put a link.
Especially if it's not just some dude saying, "Yeah, it'll work."
Yeah,
the DOT, that's official.
But they are, just to note, they are still open to alternatives to that, as long as the company or the product can prove that it achieves that similar safety level. So it's not just that.
Great.
I will say, as we looked at security, there were a number of folks that were internal to DOT and external, looking at Jersey barriers and other things. And so there was always a tension of like, how movable, how easily dismantleable do you want something to be? And we ended up generally settling on the ease of moving these setups as being a really critical aspect in terms of the design of the program. And I think that, as the water-filled barrier market kind of responds and improves and looks at this as actually a market, I think that will also yield some interesting innovations.
What are you seeing as your, you said August is your deadline for the permanency. Are you seeing a robust application process, and how are you reaching out to these 13,000 folks you think would be here?
Yeah. So all the applications are being made to DOT. I think they've said a few hundred of those to date. People are still getting used to it, or there's going to be another publicity push. As we get closer to the deadline, I think they're going to get a wave of those. It's interesting. They similar to what you mentioned with the kind of navigators. They have people at DOT and this dedicated team to receive the applications and help guide through the process. It's not as simple as a self-certified in the permanent program, so there's a couple steps involved, but they're having people at DOT and a team there that'll help guide the restaurants through that. So August 3rd will tell how many restaurants do apply there, and what the breakdown is. I think similarly hoping to they're easing restrictions in the process on the sidewalk cafes as well, and trying to make that equal to what could be possible in the roadway, so that we can see a blend of both picture.
Thank you so much for having me. I do need to leave, but Molly Hartman from my office is going to stay on, I believe, through the rest, and can also answer the question. She's been in a major part of the policy and legislative team that helped to make this happen. So thank you for having me. This is fantastic. I can't wait to coming back. Can I invited or not invited? Can I come back?
Always welcome back.
You're
You
always
asked
welcome.
great questions.
This was really fantastic, and I can't wait to see what happens in New York, and we can't wait to keep opening it up here in Philly.
Thank you, Councilmember Landau.
Thank you. Take care.
While I have you fellas, there's been a few questions come in about the utilities and sort of all that. So you seem to be able to be closer to restrictions than we are allowed to. And I'm wondering if that's the 24-hour removal thing, if that eased some fears of the regulators, like, well, since they have to get rid of it within 24 hours, you can be a little bit closer to this stuff. I noticed in one of your drawings, you had a sort of a hatch that could maybe serve as a manhole or something like that. And so if you could talk about some of those aspects, because that's something we all are struggling with here, because of course we have old pipes in the street that are made out of wood. We still have wooden water pipes here in Philadelphia. So we got some old stuff.
No, and yeah, we did spend a long time on this, and the manholes, the kind of larger utilities do need to have that 1'6" clearance, but they were able to kind of narrow that from 3 or 5 feet. We got a little bit closer through the process. There are a lot of other pieces like valves, gas water valves in the street that can be covered, just as long as, I mean, these flooring panels can be lifted. They're meant to be removable for easy cleaning. So a lot of the smaller service panels can be covered. It's really the manholes and other infrastructure pieces that do need to be fully visible. Now, I think we've able to find in most either ways to work around or have no flooring in that portion of the setup in the instances that we've looked at. I think the bigger issues that we've seen in terms of siting are just how wide restaurants are. The frontage of many of these are so tiny that it's tough to fit anything within that frontage. So it's exciting that the, adjacent properties are in your sites to use, and as long as you have those agreements, because a lot of those businesses are on the same lot or ownership even, and to be able to use something larger would help. So
Yeah, and just to be clear, like the city is kind of rolling this out now. I expect that some of those questions around adjacencies, like as cities like Philadelphia kind of introduce different rules and regulations, New York City will be following that and adapting the program as needed.
Okay. Well, we have a bit of a serious question here from Job, but there was a recent testimony at Philadelphia City Hall that there was a fatality in a New York streetery. Is this accurate, or do you know anything about it?
I don't know of any data.
Or was that fantasticism that was put out there to scare people?
There have definitely been a number of accidents with streeteries, with injuries and fatalities, and I think I would say there are two things, at least in terms of how they relate to the permanent program. One is the barrier design of a lot of the sort of initial round of streeteries wasn't thought through in quite as robust a way as it was for the permanent program. And so even thinking about the materiality, and the clearance, the buffers, other things that wasn't taken into account quite as much. On the other hand, it's also just worth noting that there are a range of different curbside accidents and other accidents that happen at the curb in New York City. And so, while certainly streeteries and streetery design is part of that, it's also it's a complex landscape to be driving in, and one that benefits from things like daylighting or other thinking about buffers in the street, or better integration of bike lanes into street design. So we've been really working closely with the DOT traffic engineering folks and with our structural partners at Silman to kind of develop a better system. It's not an armored system, though.
Okay.
Two
Do you have
takeaways?
Oh, go ahead.
Real quickly on the crash data that we did look at. Two takeaways were just a lot of the visibility issues, people crossing the street and not being able to see that oncoming traffic. And so that's one of the reasons a lot of these are fully enclosed in the temporary program, that the visibility and not having any enclosure on the sides is a key piece of that, to have that connectivity, the clearances as well. The second thing is, I think a lot of the crashes were secondary impacts, like two cars that hit each other and may have, resulted in something hitting the setup. So it was difficult for Silman on the structural side to come up with one scenario. There's a lot of scenarios on how this could be impacted. So it wasn't. It's just I think the more substantial and actually achieving these weight limits. I think a lot of this was a similar weight requirement was in the temporary program, but a lot were not filled to that level, or the sand was not installed to that level. So compliance would be a key piece of it.
Do you have streets that are controlled by the city and streets that are controlled by the state like we do here?
Most of the streets in New York City that are controlled by the states are highways in New York. So grade separated highways, and a lot of them are state signed but city controlled and city maintained. So it's not the same situation as Philadelphia, where you have like MOTU streets and then PennDOT streets, and jurisdiction varies and attitudes towards how to design the street varies significantly. We have that. It's just it's more grade separated versus kind of on street in terms of those differences. So the state DOT did not really play a role in this effort.
Okay, so if Moses had anything to do with it, you can't have a streetery there.
Basically.
Digging through some of the old questions. We got a couple more minutes.
So I wanted to also flag Dan Bomick, who is a traffic engineer who was involved in our right-of-way reform event a couple weeks ago. Yeah, pointed out that we have crashmapper.org, and in Philadelphia we have PennDOT's PCIT website, so we can look at all that data and information there as we're reviewing these and studying these.
Great.
I did. Nice to see you.
I see that. Thanks, Dan. So we got these guys for 6 more minutes. Anybody else pondering something where you can have access to this? I know I see Renee on here. You're doing some really creative stuff with better barriers. That's
Hey,
our-
Guy Heyman, you want to jump in and ask a question?
Hi, yeah. I was just wondering, I know a lot of restaurateurs, and I'm just wondering in New York, what is the minimum requirement for a permit? I think you alluded to some minimum requirements, but you know, there's an issue here. Sometimes we face this in the parks committees. How much structure do you add and still remain outdoors, nature, alfresco dining? You obviously have to add, you know, certain minimum safety issues, and of course maybe elements for weather. But what can you get away with in New York without, you know, creating too much structure that you don't feel outdoors any longer?
Right. The minimum that you can have in this permanent program is the barriers for that safety element. It needs to be accessible. So you need a ramp for the curb transition, and tables and chairs. So that's the minimum requirement. You know, I think there's been a lot to the extreme in the temporary program. They've been fully enclosed. They've had heating and cooling and everything, and this is, you know, certainly is going to you know, change in the future with the more modular and seasonality piece of this as well. But you know, I think the general direction is this is going to be a little bit lighter weight in the future to make sure because of the storage and modular nature of it too. So the roofs, you're still allowed to do a rigid roof, but probably a lot are going to do lighter solutions as well. A lot of restaurants can use that.
Questions come about how this impacts or how does it work with your street cleaning teams?
Yeah, I mean, I think that's you know, part of the seasonality of it too is kind of the cleanliness of the street, and kind of maintenance and off season there. You know, they work around it in the dining season. You know, there's certainly, it has collected even in one dining season that we see, and being able to spray out below these setups, they catch a lot of mud. You know, we've even had to, in taking down these setups that have been up there for 3 years, you have to shovel out the mud. It's so bad, the layers of what's under there. So street cleaning is important because a lot does collect along that curb, and just, you know, I think it's starting to affect the experience of the dining too with the rodent population there. So that's one of the key things we're trying to solve here.
Always comes back to the rodents.
Yes.
And the new guidelines also add like an explicit drainage channel to permit sort of water at least to flow along the curb, which hadn't been in place. So a lot of the old setups were literally blocking drainage flow, which was a major problem.
Yeah, it's basically a 6-inch bridge that you have to do to the setup to let that water flow along the curb.
And David, I think you mentioned it in the chat, but guidelines on heating elements, you're doing no fossil fuels, and electricity isn't connected back to the building. It's all battery powered, correct?
There is an option to hardwire to connect back to the building. Obviously, you know, that is a little more complex in a seasonal situation. You Yeah,
Do you have to
so
channel in the sidewalk to do that?
you have to
Or do you go up
and-
overhead?
overhead, and the DOT
Okay.
requirements for that are 14 feet over the sidewalk. So we're seeing a lot of those a lot closer. I almost hit my head being 6 feet. You know, I almost hit my head on a lot of these. It's 14 feet in the new rules. We're testing that at 1. It's a very difficult thing to do. You know, it's so we don't think that there are a lot that are going to take that on in the future. So we proposed and kind of in the marketplace listing a lot of battery powered solutions, smaller battery packs for light fixture, or smaller batteries that power multiple light fixtures, but that really constrains heating or cooling in there, not to a bad extent, but because these are going to be much more open as well. But batteries only power a certain amount of lights and possibly a fan, so it's going to be much lighter weight in the future, I think, in what we're saying. So,
And were the
but,
PV
you know,
panels that I saw in those theoretical or in practice?
in practice, we tested those out. Those were basically, the same that you would could bring on a camping trip. You know, they're Jackery panels. You could set them up temporary. We've also looked at some, and going to list some different fabrics that have them included as well. There's different companies that offer a kind of a vestibule type fabric with the PVs integrated. We'll see how it performs. It's still a shady street, so this is part of the evaluation and seeing how this goes. But it's out there. It's been out there for a couple months, and we're getting some data back.
Great. Well, I think we're at 11:30.
Yeah, so if folks want to throw their camera on and give a round of applause to these guys and to the council member, we certainly appreciate you taking part and sharing your knowledge and your expertise with us. I saw all the links that you dropped in the chat, and we'll make sure that those get shared around. So yeah, thank you for coming out. Today is the last day. If you have a DAG 2026 wish list item that you want to see our city take on for 2026, throw it in that Google form, and we will be sharing it with city government, and we will be back looking at Nate's face again, this time in person on June 20th. We're talking about the West Philadelphia waterfront. Thanks again, everybody, and have a great Tuesday.
Bye all.
Thank you all.
Thank you.
Thank you. Great
Thanks for having us.
presentation.
Thank you.